So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but you didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
I really didn't. I mean, I just watched it happen.
The man in this terrifying interrogation video is 39-year-old Mark Jensen, whose seemingly idyllic marriage was shattered by a terrible incident that ended in the death of his 40-year-old wife, Julie Jensen, on December 3, 1998. Until a note appeared from the grave, it was assumed Julie had committed herself, leaving her family sad.
You know, she contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter. Okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead.
A letter that completely changed the course of the investigation. What was the real reason for Julie's death? And how did a letter get out of the grave? Hello everyone, and welcome back to Case Files Unlocked. Today, we investigate the bizarre case of Julie Jensen and attempt to separate fact from fantasy, in a narrative that continues to intrigue true crime fans all over the world. But first, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and push the notification bell below. Without further ado, let us delve into the riddle. Located on the Lake Michigan coast, it is in the heart of the Chicago-Milwaukee region. Pleasant Prairie is a lovely community in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. The natural beauty of this area is one of its main draws, with various parks, nature preserves, and hiking trails available for residents and visitors to enjoy. The village's economy is growing, with several significant corporations such as Amazon and Uline. Pleasant Prairie is home to the Pleasant Prairie Premium Outlets, which contain over 90 high-end retail businesses and are a popular shopping destination. Pleasant Prairie certainly stands out as a unique and appealing area to live in with all of its unique features. It thrives in the summer, but turns forlorn as winter approaches. No one in this lovely Wisconsin community, however, was quite prepared for what happened in early December 1998. Julie Jensen was born on February 26, 1958, as Julie Carol Griffin. Raymond Griffin and June Constance Hackert Griffin are her parents. Julie was the only daughter in a family of 6 children. Richard, one of Julie's brothers, died in 1957, barely a year before Julie was born. She did, however, have the opportunity to grow up alongside her other 4 brothers, Larry, Michael, Hall, and Patrick. Julie was the princess of the family as the only girl among 5 siblings, and her brothers were her protectors. Despite having a family of 7, Raymond's profession at an automobile manufacturing company ensured the Griffins' well-being. Julie, on the other hand, was a stay-at-home mom who devoted her entire life to her 5 children. Julie and her siblings grew up in a religious home, attending regular church services and Sunday school lessons, which increased Julie's confidence in God. She had always loved family and revered elders throughout her life. Julie was described as a peaceful, laid-back, truthful, and cheery soul by those who knew and loved her. Julie moved across Kenosha County as she grew up, but she maintained her reputation as an exceptional student throughout middle and high school. She sang in the church choir in addition to her studies. Julie graduated from high school in 1976 and went on to study nursing at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside. In addition, she worked part-time at a Sears department store in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. She believed that her faith in God would guide her down a path that had been predetermined for her. Either faith or fate led her to the man she imagined she'd spend her life with. Julie began a love relationship with Mark Jensen, a fellow student a year her junior in 1981, when she was 23 years old and attending university. Mark eventually graduated from college with honors and went on to work as a stockbroker. Julie, on the other hand, dropped out only 1 semester before finishing her degree. She had no problems with her studies, but because of the nature of her job, she had to closely monitor the patients, which took a toll on her mind. She departed after recognizing that the nursing industry was not a good fit for her. She was nevertheless thrilled about a new chapter in her life. Mark and Julie married in 1984 and lived in Pleasant Prairie's Carroll Beach community. Mark went on to work in finance and support the family, while Julie stayed at home. They were at the top of their game as a couple for the first few years of their marriage. Mark and Julie's first child was born in 1990. Julie devoted herself to their son's well-being, while Mark ensured their financial stability. Mark and Julie welcomed their second son, Douglas, into the world just a few years later, in 1995. Their sons were the light of their lives, and Julie and Mark participated in many activities such as fishing, camping, and swimming to spend time with their children. The Jensens were extremely popular in the area, hosting several get-togethers, barbecues, and pool parties at their home. Julie, who is known for her outgoing personality, attended a women's book club with some of her neighborhood acquaintances. But at the heart of it all, her priority was her marriage and her two sons. David was 8 years old in 1998, and Douglas was 3. Julie worked part-time for the Port Authority of Chicago, while Mark Jensen managed the Stifel-Nicholas office in Racine, Washington. Julie also volunteered at Southport Elementary School, where David was in 3rd grade. From the outside, Mark and Julie Jensen appeared to have it all. They had a steady income, a gorgeous house, a snug boat, and 2 lovely children with whom they spent many vacations. However, no one could have predicted the nightmare that would permanently turn their lives upside down, and then a letter from the dead. If you've made it this far in the video and are wondering if a letter emerging from the tomb is too far-fetched, we assure you that it is worthwhile to stay until the end to obtain a better grasp of this intriguing subject. Mark Jensen dialed 911 on the afternoon of December 3, 1998, to report that his 40-year-old wife, Julie Jensen, was not breathing. Sergeant Dan Riley and Officer Laura Hoffman of the Pleasant Prairie Police Department arrived at the Jensen residence at 9020 Lakeshore Drive around 4:35 p.m. When they arrived at the house, they saw Mark Jensen in the kitchen, apparently distressed and trying to use his phone. He pointed down the corridor when they inquired where his wife was. They reached the bedroom at the end of the corridor to find Julie lying on her stomach with her face partially hidden in a pillow. She was clearly gone, prompting the officers to send in reinforcements to gather forensic evidence. The detectives, however, found no evident traces of her death. There were no stab wounds, bullet wounds, or battery wounds anywhere on her body. They also found no suspicious objects during their check of the house. She was, nonetheless, a healthy 40-year-old lady. As a result, it appeared doubtful that this was a natural death. While Julie's body was being transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, the detective began questioning Mark about the circumstances leading up to this tragedy.
But we need to find out what happened here.
Paul, I did not do anything to hurt her. There was a question between myself and the kid that morning whether or not to call an ambulance. Her breathing was funny. She could hardly get out of bed. I mean, it was a god-awful situation.
Julie had been sick for 3 days, according to Mark, and had even vomited the day before. He expressed concern about Julie's health, but she refused to go to the doctor.
Here in your statement, Wednesday, December 3rd, Julie, they could hardly move. Here 9 p.m., told me that she was fine and she wanted to commit. And on Wednesday morning, Julie asked me not to call anyone, meaning not to call her help. She wanted to die. Right?
Yeah.
So on Wednesday
Wednesday
morning,
morning, she asked me not to call anybody.
she's pretty bad off. Wednesday
She
morning.
wasn't looking good. She couldn't. No motor control.
Should you call the rescue squad that Wednesday, you think? She was bad off enough to where she should have called the rescue squad, but she didn't want you to.
She didn't want me to. Well, right, I should have. In hindsight, I know that.
So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but she didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
I really did. I mean, I just watched it happen.
Yeah.
Mark had promised his children that if Julie didn't feel better by the time they returned, he would take her to the hospital. Unfortunately, the children would never see their mother alive and well again. Mark said his wife was unresponsive in bed when he came home from picking up their kids from school. Julie's family was informed of the tragedy, and her 4 brothers were heartbroken by the news. Investigators were unsure of Julie's cause of death, and they are hoping that autopsy reports may shed some light on the mystery. Unfortunately, the initial autopsy report failed to pinpoint a cause of death. A toxicology investigation ultimately revealed that Julie died as a result of ethylene glycol poisoning, which is often used as an antifreeze or radiator fluid additive to keep the coolant from freezing. Blood, kidney, and stomach contents tests revealed that she had received at least 2 doses of ethylene glycol, with the final dose administered moments before her death. Investigators suspected Julie had committed suicide at this point, but they needed to be certain to break this case, so they dug deeper into Mark and Julie Jensen's lives. They quickly learned that things were not as they seemed on the surface. Rather, secrets lurked behind the facade of a loving and happy family. Detectives discovered that Mark and Julie's marital issues first surfaced in the early 1990s, shortly after the birth of David. Julie, like many other women, had postpartum depression after the exhausting struggle of childbirth. Her situation was so critical that she needed to see psychotherapist Paul DeFazio. Fazio discovered Julie's difficult family background during therapy, which included her mother's prolonged depression and alcoholism, as well as her brother Patrick's attempted suicide at the age of 17. Julie also mentioned how she disliked being a housewife, how she felt obligated to perform all of the extra work for the baby, and even conveyed her terrible thoughts of suicide. DeFazio anticipated everything returning to normal when she was put on antidepressants. Julie's brief affair with a co-worker, Perry Turica, resulted from the difficult time of depression. Turek met Julie at the financial firm where both of them worked. He was also going through a difficult marriage at the time, and the two eventually became friends. Julie invited Turica to her home for dinner one weekend while Mark was away. He eventually ended up spending the weekend at Julie's house, and the two ended up sleeping together. Turica had a warm spot for Julie and would have liked to keep the connection going. Julie ended the relationship, severed all contact with them, and even quit her job. Julie moved on with her life, but she couldn't shake the shame. Julie confessed her brief romance with Turica to Mark in 1991, shortly after the birth of David. Though Mark promised to forget about it, the incident strained their friendship indefinitely. Mark got paranoid as a result of this and could no longer trust Julie. The situation deteriorated to the point where Julie filed for divorce in 1991, but she did not follow through. Julie withdrew her divorce after the couple went to counseling together. However, the intricacies of the Jensen household remained unfinished. On a regular basis, explicit images were sent to the Jensen house and Mark's workplace. Julie also received abusive phone calls from an unknown source. Although no one knew who was pulling these terrible jokes, Mark had a feeling Perry Turica was the mastermind behind it all. Julie, on the other hand, was unsure of everything, and her emotional state was unprepared to deal with it all. With a persistent anonymous campaign of harassing phone calls and receiving images throughout the years, around 1993, the Jensens approached the authorities. Officer Ronald Cosman of the Pleasant Prairie Police Department was investigating the matter but was unable to identify a suspect. In 4 separate instances, he tapped Julie's phone. Each time, the calls would stop, only to resume later when Julie attempted to return to her normal life, perhaps to mend their strained friendship. Mark and Julie planned to have their second child in 1995 since children bring people closer together, but in the course of attempting to mend their wounded hearts, they grew apart. They preserved the appearance of a happy family and spend time together around their children in front of the outside world. It became evident that having a kid would not solve their issues. While Mark was immersed in his work, Julie was despondent, exhausted, and unappreciated. Her emotions were raging out of control. Julie's situation was made more difficult by the couple's lack of trust. Her volatile marriage reminded her of her sad background, and her greatest worry was becoming like her mother. As a result, despite her intense feelings, she avoided drinking, and perhaps this pushed her even further away from Mark. Julie told many of her friends that Mark wanted her to join them for drinks in the evenings and remain late at bars, something she was not looking forward to doing. For the sake of their children, she decided to stay at home. This background of a tumultuous marriage suggested to investigators that Julie could have committed suicide. However, in a surprising turn of events, even more weird claims emerged, changing the trajectory of the investigation. During this time of turmoil in his own marriage, Mark became close to Kelly LaBunte, a co-worker at the financial firm where he worked. Mark held a superior position at work over Kelly, who is nearly a decade his junior. Despite Mark's marriage to Julie and Kelly's engagement to someone else, the couple began an affair. Mark and Kelly exchanged several amorous letters in the months leading up to Julie's death, all while keeping it a secret from their wives. With Mark's growing desire to be with Kelly, Julie became more of a bother to him. Julie, on the other hand, observed a difference in Mark, despite the fact that their marriage had always been rocky. Julie noticed a change for the worse in 1998. Though most of the Jensen family's friends were ignorant of their turbulent relationship, she confided in some of her close book club friends and one of her son's teachers that she was terrified of Mark. She even speculated that Mark was planning to murder her. Julie informed her friends that if Mark discussed divorce, he would kill her first. She also stated that sticking with Mark was better for their sons, so her friends remained silent. Despite the anticipated danger, she felt a strong sense of loyalty and commitment to her husband and his children. She was fighting to cope with the overpowering sensations of melancholy, worry, and terror that she was experiencing. As the problem worsened, Julie sought care from Dr. Richard Borman, the Jensen family physician. Borman recognized her distress and prescribed Paxil and Ambien, an antidepressant and a sleep drug, respectively. Mark told many people in the weeks leading up to Julie Jensen's death that Julie was sad, contemplating suicide, and had lost a large amount of weight. These facts were surprising to investigators. While they were busy uncovering the truth about Mark and Julie's relationship, some alarming events were occurring. Mark may not have been the ideal husband for Julie, but her brothers were astounded when Mark refused to fulfill Julie's decision even in death. Julie had previously expressed a desire to be buried with her late brother Richard, but Mark chose to be cremated without informing the family. It was a huge setback for them. Needless to say, our brothers were suspicious of Mark's motives after this. They couldn't shake the feeling that he had something to do with their sister's murder. Mark, on the other hand, was not one to back down. During Julie's burial, his behavior grew even more odd. He was said to have shown no symptoms of mourning and even laughed and cracked jokes. One of Julie's acquaintances afterwards said that a stranger's death would have been more difficult and painful than Mark Jensen's wife's death. Neighbors reportedly reported seeing Mark dispose of what seemed to be Julie's items in the trash dump just a week after her funeral. Fingers were pointing from all directions at one man, Mark Jensen. However, feelings are not admissible as evidence in a court of law, and the proof acquired by the police after interrogating a large number of people and going deeper into the link was only circumstantial. The investigators were confronted with the task of acquiring concrete evidence, only to have incriminating information emerge from an unexpected source. Julie's next-door neighbor and friends, Ted and Margaret White, handed up the evidence in the form of a sealed package to authorities. They told the detectives that Julie came to them shortly before her death and gave them the package for safety, with the instructions that the packet only go to the authorities if something happened to her. They informed the police that she was afraid her spouse was going to hurt her. A note from Julie and a picture of Mark's business planner with a shopping list scrawled on it were both inside the envelope. Surprisingly, narcotics and syringes were featured on the list, but that was nothing compared to the letter's substance, which summoned the voice of the dead. Her statements from the grave were so horrifying that they had the potential to provide investigators with crucial proof. She went on to add that she would never commit suicide because of her children, who meant everything to her. She also stated that she believed Mark had never completely forgiven her for her adulterous affair in 1990. She concluded the letter by expressing gratitude to her husband and children, whom she addressed with her 3 Ds, David Douglas and their father. The handwriting experts determined that the letter came from Julie by comparing known written samples of Julie. This was one of those extremely rare situations when the deceased foretold her own future, leaving indications as to who was responsible for her demise. The letter became known as the letter from the grave, and it drew national attention. However, for the time being, detectives kept the letter hidden beneath the letter, which was incriminating enough. Other evidence emerged, with searches of the Jensen family computer revealing additional incriminating data. There had been some frightening site searches on the computer in the days leading up to Julie's death, including botulism and ethylene glycol poisoning. Detectives also discovered that Julie had left voicemails with police officer Ron Kosman, who had investigated the harassing phone calls and images in the 1990s prior to her death. She warned in the voicemails that if she died, Mark should be examined. Unfortunately, Kosman was out of town at the time, and he didn't return until it was too late. Another forensic investigation concluded that Julie Jensen died as a result of asphyxiation and poisoning. This was determined after inspecting the bruising on her rib muscles, and crime scene images revealed a pillow over her head and an oddly twisted nose. Detectives thought Mark was poisoning her over a few days, but ended up smothering her since the process was too sluggish. Mark Jensen was brought to the police station for questioning for the first time 5 months after Julie died. The interview began on April 21, 1999, with a query about why Mark did nothing to help his wife, despite knowing she was mentally ill and bedridden. Detective Paul Ratsburg questioned Mark about Julie's peculiar position on their marriage bed as the interrogation progressed.
Are you up to looking at some pictures of her? I can grab them real quick. Okay. Show you where the position she was in there. And maybe you could explain it a little bit further.
I've got the image in my mind.
Okay. It'll take me just a minute though. Okay. Let me bring back in the photos and I'll show you. See, like here's a picture of Julie. And you can see here, look at the nose, how it's bent, like it was pushed into the pillow. Like somebody pushed it in there. I don't know how to explain that, Mark. You know, here's probably a better. See how I mean, that's almost looks like it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
I have Dr. Chambliss's report right here, which says it's basically an asphyxia death. She's suffocated. And the only way you can suffocate, Mark, is if you did something to her. A 41-year-old young female does just not stop breathing. You had to do something, Mark. Be honest with me. Be straight with me, Mark. Be a man. Tell me what happened here.
Nothing more than what I told you.
You didn't get on top of her?
No.
Well, the evidence suggests is that there was a pillow over her head. If you recall, you saw the nose, same as I did. I got pictures of it.
Right.
Okay? You saw the nose and put a pillow over her head.
No.
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 Mark, how did she stop breathing, Mark? Be straight with me. Be honest with
When
me.
I found her,
Mark, you had to do something.
I did not fall.
How can you explain this?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But no matter how hard you pressed Mark, he continued to deny all of the charges. He brought up his damaged marriage and his covert girlfriend to provoke Mark.
Well, let's get back here to Julie. I mean, here, we'll look at where you're sitting from my position here, Mark. Okay? One, we have a marriage that was not good.
Right.
Okay? That was not good. You basically has a girlfriend at this point, the one that you were seeing before Julie. Okay? I've talked to some of Julie's friends, and they said she was divorced was mentioned, some of this other stuff. You guys were not having a good marriage. Okay?
Rosberg had no other choice but to reveal the letter.
You know, she contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter. Okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead. You know, I'm not making this up. This is true evidence. And here we have Julie Jensen telling me that if she dies, you're the person that did it. If anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. I have been doing this 15 years, Mark, and I've never had anybody leave me a letter telling me that if they die, it's this person that killed me.
The letter surprised Mark. Even so, he refused to confess and insisted that he had nothing to do with his wife's murder. Julie's family and acquaintances believed Mark was to blame for her death. Mark's family was convinced otherwise. Dan and Florence, his parents, believed the cops made a mistake. They claimed that Julie, as a qualified nurse, was well-versed in medications and poisons. They also indicated that Julie used a home computer to conduct research before taking a small amount of ethylene glycol and never planned to die. They assumed she had overestimated the dose and perished as a result. They suspect Julie devised a scheme to make it appear as if she was poisoned by Mark in order for him to go to prison and her to end up with the kids in the house. It was the only reason Julie stayed in the house despite alerting many people that she was in danger. Dan Jensen explicitly stated in his statement that he believed Julie's letter was part of her strategy. It was all part of her years of planning and structuring how she was going to achieve this. She needed witnesses other than the poisoning, so she made sure she sent the letter to the next-door neighbor, and she needed to find individuals who would testify on her behalf. Dan explained. Is it possible? Could Julie Jensen have accomplished all of this with only a frame or a husband? Or was there something more nefarious going on in that house? Nobody had an answer yet, but authorities did not appear to believe the story. In the midst of various uncertainties, Mark Jensen undoubtedly found himself under the scrutiny of law enforcement. However, detectives did not have enough physical evidence to prosecute anyone for murder at the time. Julie's message was an oblique reference to Mark's suspected guilt. However, it was inadmissible in court because, under U.S. law, an accused must always have the right to face the accuser. In Mark's case, his accuser, Julie, had died, so there was no chance to cross-examine her. As investigators dedicated themselves to the exhausting task of locating significant evidence to apprehend Mark, he appeared to be getting on with his life. Kelly LeBunt divorced her ex-husband and moved into the Jensen home. Mark and Kelly married in May 2002 and moved to Wisconsin with David and Douglas, where Mark established a thriving construction business. Kelly gave birth to Mark's son later that year. However, it was in the same year that prosecutors eventually charged Mark Jensen with first-degree murder. Mark, 42 at the time, was arrested on March 18, 2002. However, the fight to include the letter and voicemails in the trial was still underway. Mark's defense, on the other hand, was doing everything they could to keep them at bay. The legal dispute over evidence lasted several years. After many pretrial hearings in 2007, the Wisconsin Supreme Court deemed the letter admissible as evidence. The court decided that there was sufficient reasonable cause to think that Mark's right to confront Julie had been waived because he most likely hindered the witness from testifying. On January 7, 2008, 9 years after Julie Jensen's terrible death, Mark Jensen's trial began in Kenosha County Court. During the trial, Mark's defense attorney, Craig Albee, attempted to present Julie as an emotionally troubled and miserable woman who committed suicide while framing her husband as a form of vengeance. He questioned Julie's motivations while detailing how Julie conveyed her anxieties to everyone, yet did not leave Mark or ensure the safety of her children.
People who are depressed feel hopeless. It's a dark place, it's terrifying, it's frightening because there's no way out. And we'll come back to the letter many times, and you'll have to decide whether it's a blueprint for framing her husband.
The defense even mentioned Julie telling one of her neighbors not to be concerned if she was not seen outside on December 2nd, 1998, because she was supposed to be put on medicine. I'll also reveal that Mark wasn't the only one who utilized the Jensen family computer, and Julie's frightening web searches could have been her doing all along. These points certainly drew the jury's attention, but the prosecution had much more to say. The prosecutor, District Attorney Robert Jamboy, portrayed Julie Jensen as a troubled wife with both motivation and opportunity to murder her.
She was sick, why she was ill, why she was suffering. As he lay next to her that night in the marital bed on the evening of December 3rd, 1998, as she was barely able to breathe, Mark Jensen lay there next to her, knowing what she was going through because he'd read all about it on the internet in the months preceding her death. Julie viewed herself as a loving mother and as a loving wife, and all she wanted was some attention from her husband. She wanted her husband to love her, and in fact, she even thought that he was trying to poison her.
The prosecution presented witness after witness who claimed that Julie was frightened of her husband to back up their case. The majority of individuals who testified were Julie's neighbors and friends. Among those witnesses was Edward Klug, Mark's former employee, who gave a spine-chilling testimony. Ed Klug told the judge that he had a talk with Mark in a pub in 1998, only weeks before Julie died.
He started talking about different websites that he had been going to and talking about poisoning his wife.
Klug kept Heath's communication confidential until the trial. The information was stunning. However, Mark's defense attempted to poke holes in his account, wondering why he had not previously revealed the truth. Ed Klug just stated that he was terrified of Mark. Whether his story was genuine or not, there would be more surprises in the courtroom. The prosecution also invited 2 additional inmates who served time with Mark in 2007 to testify. David Thompson, who was being held on robbery charges, was the first to take the stand. Thompson alleged that Mark was devising a scheme to make Edward Klug vanish off the face of the earth.
He said Mr. Klug would ultimately be the one that would bring him down to get him locked up in prison. And he wished that he would just go away.
And what did you do in order to accomplish that objective?
I told him that I could possibly make it happen for him.
David states that he promised to do this job to kidnap Klug in exchange for money, but he never intended to carry it out. Thompson even called Kelly and asked for money, despite the fact that the actual plan was never mentioned.
You got an offer of help today in a different way, which was interesting. It might have you give them some money, just a little bit. Well,
How much?
it'd be like 500, maybe twice, and that would be it.
Aaron Dillard, a convicted felon, was the next in line for jailhouse informants. He stated that while incarcerated, Mark Jensen confessed to him that he poisoned his wife and explained how he choked her to death in graphic detail. Despite Mark's defense accusing both inmates of lying for their personal profit, the jurors did not appear to believe Mark's tale. Additionally, eyewitness testimony supported the medical examiner's findings that Julie died of suffocation and poisoning. After all of the evidence and witness testimony was given, Craig Albee stated in his closing speech that Mark Jensen was truly innocent and had no involvement in his wife's death. Julie did it to herself by succumbing to her unstable thoughts. On the other side, prosecutor Robert Chamwise accused Mark of murdering his wife and watching her die on purpose. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on February 21, 2008. Prosecutor Robert Chamwise shared his comments shortly after the decision was pronounced. Mark Jensen is one of the coldest-blooded guys I've ever met, lying next to his wife at night, struggling for breath, gasping to live, but striving to survive as he listens to her and waits for her to die. Mark Jensen was sentenced in court on February 27, 2008. His sons, David and Douglas, who had always believed in their father's innocence, asked for mercy. Julie's brother, Paul Griffin, asked the judge not to show pity to his sister's murderer.
The court today to show no mercy for Mark Jensen. Why, you might ask? Because he showed no mercy to his wife, my sister, Julie Jensen.
The court made some severe remarks to Mark Jensen before sentencing. He was eventually sentenced to life in jail without the chance of release. To Julie's loved ones, justice was done for all the pain she endured throughout her life, including in her final moments. However, the story was far from done. After years of appeals, Mark Jensen was granted a new trial after the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that Julie's letter should not have been admitted into evidence because it violated Jensen's Sixth Amendment rights. Mark's second trial began on January 9, 2023, without the letter this time. The prosecution emphasized other evidence that established his guilt, such as the frightening online searches. On February 1, 2023, the jury declared him guilty again after a day of deliberation, despite his heartfelt pleas for parole eligibility. Mark Jensen, 63, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the second time. Hopefully, the finale viewer deals with everything once and for all. Whatever the reality is, their two sons' lives were irrevocably changed as a result of this tragic tragedy. Losing a parent due to violence is an incomprehensible experience. However, having it in the hands of the other parent is a whole different level of trauma. The boys had to deal with not only the loss of their mother, but also the idea that their father was to blame for her death. This would surely have caused emotional distress. It's devastating to think that the actions of a single person may destroy a family. Do you believe Mark Jensen murdered his wife, or was Julie to blame for her own death? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Share, like, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling, genuine stories.